This podcast is brought to you by Odoo. Support Moore's Law is dead and get your first app free by checking out Odoo at the link in the description. And then it is also brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Get Microsoft software for 25% off with offer code Broken Silicon, and then also use offer code Broken Silicon to get 6% off at Silver Knight PCs. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by someone I imagine doesn't need a whole lot of introduction in this community. I mean, let alone for the reason that you've been on it, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times. Actually, I really remember the first time I had you on, I believe in 2019, I was really proud of a thumbnail I made where I made it look like you were Santa climbing out of a chimney.
I remember that.
Bag full of graphics cards. Of course, by now I've learned that the better way to get clicks is just put in big text, whatever the subject is, and make it simpler. For someone,
not as much fun, is it?
I had way more fun making thumbnails in 2019, but I also got way less clicks. So, but yeah, please, just for completionist's sake, introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And I think an interesting question might be like, what makes you keep doing this as opposed to something else?
That is a hard question. Well, I'm Steve from Hardware Unboxed, the YouTube channel, and we mostly test and review consumer PC tech parts, CPUs, GPUs, motherboards, most recently, just all computer tech stuff. So that's, I do it because it's fun, right? I think that's why I was doing it. I still enjoy it. I still enjoy it. We're in a bit of a weird situation over the last few years where it hasn't been probably as much fun as I would like. But yeah, usually I just like testing the hardware, working out, how it performs, why it performs a certain way, what's sort of going on with things like, Zen 5, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, just basically because it's a hobby that became my job. So that's always a good combination.
Yeah, I mean, speaking for myself, I think I could do something else, but I'm just someone that the second I can make my own hours, even if they're honestly more hours than I used to work before this, it's very hard for me to imagine going back to a normal 9 to 5. And I'm sure you agree, but I also, I actually find it just as fun, if not from my perspective, more fun to talk about a lot of the stuff we talk about now compared to 4 or 5 years ago. But the types of the reasons you would test something and the conversations we have, they're just not the ones I think we were used to having for 10 years straight. Like there was like 10 years where you get the product, you test it. Is it better value? Is there a new feature? It's still true that that's what you're looking at. But I think you would agree, it's just changed how you have to evaluate a product now. It's just not, it's not as black and white, really.
Yeah, I think there's been a sort of a shift in the industry as well. It's gone from a hobby that was relatively affordable and you could buy more inexpensive parts and, stuff like overclocking and extract more from them. And now you sort of pay for all of that. So it's just become more and more costly to do. So fewer and fewer people can enjoy it towards the pointy end. It's more, you're more just trying to get in at the entry level these days, a lot of people, it seems, which is disappointing because, the higher end stuff is definitely more exciting. That's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would also say, though, the difference between the top and the bottom has never been larger.
Yeah, that's right.
But the bottom didn't even really exist before, did it? I mean, unless you were, especially in the 90s, unless you got to a certain threshold, there was no APU in anything that was going to run anything. Even like if you wanted a console, I mean, people like to make fun of them sometimes still, but it's like, I mean, come on, compare what you're doing with an N64, or certainly even worse, a PS1, compared to what you can do with a PC. And it's like, there's just half of the games you can't play. I mean,
yeah, there's certainly a lot of fun you can have on very inexpensive or even older hardware. So it's not like you have to have the latest stuff. It's just nice to be able to, you know, again, I'm not a big single player gamer, but it's nice to occasionally fire up, you know, the latest and greatest single player game or game and enjoy it at a reasonable resolution with high quality settings. And yeah, there's a big population of the gaming base now that just can't do that. Like, it's low 1080p, usually relying on heavy upscaling and now like frame generation and stuff just to sort of get it playable. So that's disappointing. I think, yeah, what you were saying many years ago, there was sort of your entry level, which is more your mid-range now, and then your mid-range, which was actually quite high-end, and then the high-end that was only slightly more high-end than the mid-range. So if you bought in at a reasonable level, it wasn't too much money, you got a pretty high-end experience, whereas now you spend a bit of money and you've sort of got an entry-level experience, and then you spend a lot more money and it's mid-range, and then Tim's actually got a video coming up on this, which is really interesting. But basically, you just keep even adjusting for inflation, you're spending more and more money and getting less and less, it seems, every few generations. It's gotten noticeably worse. So that's disappointing. I guess part of this is, you know, you review the hardware, you want to tell people about this great product that they can buy, and then you get to the end, it's like, so yeah, it's $1,000 US. Or even the motherboards we're looking at recently, like, you know, a good quality motherboard, it's like $300 US. And I mean, realistically, they're like $400 or $500 US, and that used to be a decent computer. So I know there's inflation in there, but it's not to that degree.
Yeah. I think the only saving grace, though, is like, were you to try to run a game on integrated Sandy Bridge, I mean, my Lord, you're not. And if you are, 30 frames at best. Whereas now, my PC needed to get repaired, and I used a 7600, which is quite a bit weaker, I think you would agree, than the RTX 4090. And you know, dynamic res, or I could actually get it to run in a way where I'm like, this is playable, though. This is very playable compared to, you know, what would be entry level. But I mean, I don't know. It's hard to even say, because entry level back then would have actually been like $50 or $80. But at the same time, you know, even if you had a $200 card, people were lucky if they could get an average of 60 10 years ago. So it's very different. QH Freddy writes in and he says, what do you think the 3 worst examples of product names from the last year or so are? For me, I'll let you go first. I will start reading my answer.
Whenever you put on the spot with these things, I always forget the obvious ones. I mean, things that stood out to me are stuff I covered. Like, this won't be a big deal to most people, but I didn't like the Ryzen 7 5700. Which sort of implies that it's like a 5700X minus a few hundred megahertz off the clocks or whatever, but it was an APU in disguise. So it was basically like a 5700G, but without the APU. So you only got 16 megabytes of L3 cache instead of the full 32 megabytes, and it made it substantially slower. So, you know, whereas you have a 5600X and a 5600, for example, you expect the 5700X and the 5700 to be very similar. So that's quite misleading naming there. I don't know why. Well, I know why they did it, but not something I don't know if I do,
actually. Because my answer was the AI9 HX370, which I just think is the HX shouldn't be there, or the X should be at the end. It's just the most ridiculous name I've ever seen. And I could bring up the 7900 GRE kind of, or the TI Super, but you know, now that you mention, I mean, actually, I think the dumbest name might be the 5900 XT. I didn't even write that down, because that's it. It's like, why can't we just call it what it is? It would still sell. That's
right. There's plenty of like dumb names that are either overly complicated or don't really make sense. But for me, the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones that are just anti-consumer, like they're misleading. So that's why I pick stuff like the 5700, because it's not what it should be based on all other naming. Like they've established a naming convention, and then they're like, we'll just break it here to screw over people. So those are the ones that jump out at me. But yeah, I mean, the TI Super is just absurd. Again, it's not really robbing anyone of anything. It's a dumb
It's just
name.
a mouthful.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, the TI is already like, okay, cool, add that to the end, and then the Super's also like, okay, it's a bit lame. Like this is the 4080 Super. Okay, but then the TI Super, it's like, yeah, that's just a combo that didn't need to happen. But yeah, I mean, there's just no shortage of bad product names in this industry, and it's partly because there are just so many products.
Yeah.
Like the industry on so many levels is just so heavily segmented that they're like, add an X now and go for an H, like,
or two X's, hopefully.
Yeah, two X's, maybe three. That they can do that as well. So yeah, but I'd have to go through. I'd have to get a huge list of names to pick out my top three. But yeah, the 5700 certainly one of the worst examples, just because anti-consumer. The name itself's actually not bad. It's just what it represents.
Yeah, I'll full disclosure, like this is where I admit that sometimes things fly past me and I just don't realize the fact until it's too late. I didn't realize the 5900 XT had 16 cores until I think I watched your review of it. The whole time I was talking on Broken Silicon episode after episode thinking it was 12 cores clock faster.
That's a fair assumption.
What the heck?
Yeah, that's a weird one as well. But that's sort of in reverse. People were really angry, like, it shouldn't be called that because it doesn't have 12 cores. I'm like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but they're giving you more cores. So that's the kind of mislead I'm okay with. I mean, you shouldn't mislead in any direction, but if you're going to do it, mislead people by giving them more than what they think they're getting. That fine. Okay.
Dark Side of the Force writes in and says, how much longer would it be before you have to get a hair loss treatment sponsor from testing Zen 5? Thank you for the extensive Zen 5 testing, Steve. Actually, I want to jump in here too, just because I wonder if this is something you've thought about. Like, I remember talking to some of the contributors for Moore's Law is Dead, like Carbon Cry, Karen Osugata. They're like, oh, hopefully Steve will test this new patch or thing that came out. And I said, honestly, he probably will, but if I was Steve, I would be okay with just not testing anything for 2 weeks because patches and whatever keeps coming every week, day after day. Maybe just wait until 2 days before Arrow Lake or, a week before probably because it takes time. And that's when we'll do it because it keeps changing so much.
My main reason for not jumping on a lot of this stuff is I'm really waiting for Windows. Like, I'd love 24H2 to get the proper public rollout and test with that because of the problems we've had with 23H2. But yeah, we have new CPUs coming up, so I've got to work out what I do there because I have to update all my data one way or the other. So I either have to fresh install 23H2, get it all up to date with the performance fix and all that sort of stuff, and then benchmark. And that'll be annoying because I've got to make sure that it is performing as it should for every single CPU. So that's going to be a fun few weeks of my life. But yeah, I'd love 24H2 to come out just so I can do that. And that, again, there's a lot of CPU comparisons I'd like to be doing right now, a lot of things I'd like to be looking at. But with the whole Windows mess, I just want to wait to that, for that to be sorted out before I do too much additional testing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so if you could, though, how would you summarize your thoughts, opinion, like, or even to a friend who doesn't pay as much attention, what Zen 5 was and how the launch went a month ago, and how would you summarize the situation right now?
I don't think it's changed all that. Like, if I was to review Zen 5 today, and let's say, but yeah, I hadn't reviewed it previously, so it's not a re-review, it's an original review, it's a day one review, but if I was to do it today, I don't think it would look any different. From my day one review, I don't know what's changed. So the main problem with my day one review was I didn't know how Zen 5 was meant to perform. So, and I discussed all of this in the review, but basically, the CPUs were sent out, standard sort of review kit procedure stuff. Well, we just got the CPUs. AMD said use the DDR5 6000 CL30 memory they've been using previously, because that's still the sweet spot best memory. Nothing's changed in terms of memory support, despite the fact they keep talking about DDR5 8000 now to try and sell you new motherboards.
I was about to say, it's like their own opinion is changing over time too.
But yeah, we got the CPUs. We had the existing 600 series motherboards. They provided BIOSes for one ASRock board, one Asus, one MSI, and 1 Gigabyte board. So I started with the Gigabyte board. I updated all of my data for Zen 4 and every other CPU that was to be featured in the review leading up to this, like within 2 weeks. So all the data was fresh, knew what I was working with. I was quite happy with that. Stuck Zen 5 in, and, you know, I saw ultimately what we saw. I saw mild gains in some games, basically the same performance in others, and some examples of performance regression. And I thought, well, that can't be right. Like, what's going on here? We're expecting, in the realm of 10%, I was expecting overall, and I was seeing a 3% uplift. So I reached out to AMD, and they couldn't provide really any clarity on what it was that I was seeing, what I should be seeing. At that point in time, to be perfectly clear, they hadn't even tested with the 4090. That's what they were telling me. So they'd probably be a bit annoyed with me telling you this information, but I mean, they cocked it up. They made a mess of it. So I don't really care at this point. But basically, they told me they're seeing better results with a 7900 XTX, but they haven't tested the 4090 yet. They'll do that overnight. Because the US team, they'll get back to me with that data. So they got back to me and they said, we've done the 4090 testing, and yeah, the results are a little bit better than what you've got, but yours aren't wrong. They're not miles off. And I'm like, well, our credibility is based on us getting accurate day one information to our viewers. So I want to make sure that our numbers are bang on. Like, I don't want to be publishing incorrect information. So at this point, I started reaching out to a whole heap of other reviewers, and they're finding exactly the same results that I'm finding, but AMD's telling us it should be slightly better. So there was just endless back and forth. AMD weren't able to provide any concrete numbers. So, and this was the frustrating part. It was so vague. They said to me, we haven't actually tested the 7700X. We're doing that now. We're doing the internal testing to compare the 7700X and the 9700X.
It's hard for me to even believe.
Tell me about it. So we're only a few days now from reviews going live, and they get back to me and they say, we've done the testing, and I said, can you give me the numbers? Can you give me the data? No, we're not willing to share the data at the moment. It'll be updated into the review guide for you. Well, when will that happen? Oh, that'll happen in time for the dual CCD models, so the 9950X, the 9900X. I'm like, well, that doesn't help me with the 9700X that's going out in 2 days. And they sort of said, we're going over the numbers. It looks like you should be seeing about a 5% uplift. And I said, well, I'm seeing a 3% uplift, so I'm happy with that. Like 3%, 5%, you're talking about 1 FPS in the 60 FPS range. So I'm going to go ahead and publish that, because I've confirmed that, a lot of other trusted veterans of the review scene are finding, Tech Power Up, for example, they got 2%. So if they've got 2%, I've got 3%, and AMD saying 5%, I'm happy to send that. And I retested. Like, this isn't us being lazy. Like, in the week that we had the 9700X, the amount of sleep I lost retesting, reinstalling Windows it was ridiculous. And we got to the point where, if you're wondering why reviewers, for lack of a better term, seemed a bit pissed off, was because, like, I didn't see my family for over a week, basically. I wasted all of this time, all of this energy, only to find out that Zen 5 is, basically Zen 5%, like they say. So yeah, we got to publishing the reviews, and that was basically all the information I had from AMD at that point in time. And then they came to me just after reviews went live and said, do you test with the administrator account? And I said, well, I test with an administrator account, but, they wanted the system administrator account, which, so that's fine. And the problem I had with AMD through this whole process was they seemed to try and heavily misdirect at every single step, which, as a reviewer, few things piss me off more than a company doing that. Like, we've had we've had companies like, well, we've had MSI do it in the past with certain things. Though, again, MSI has been very good for the most part. We've had Asus do it with certain graphics cards where Tim had a big, huge run-in with Asus where they did this with a laptop. I don't know if you remember that on Hardware Unboxed, but basically Tim tested a laptop. It sucked. They gave us endless runaround and reasons. So anyway, not to get into all of that, but AMD just went from one direction to another. So they're now saying, there's a problem with Windows. You've got to use the system administrator account, and that unlocks the performance of Zen 5. And that's why we're seeing different numbers to you. Use that, and Zen 5 is much better. Oh, well, great. That's good to know. Okay. So they said there'll be a patch that'll solve this for Windows. Look into this if you'd like. It'd be great if you could confirm it for us. So I said, look, I'll get straight onto that, which is what I did. So after, this week and a half of just doing nothing but testing, I know it's my job, but I was doing 18-hour days, 7 days a week, basically. Well, that's exactly what I did. Straight after that, got back into the testing, looked into this administrator mode, and that was really interesting because put the 9700X in fresh installed Windows again, loaded up all the drivers, games, testing software, the whole lot, got into it, and lo and behold, performance was much better. I'm seeing a 10 FPS boost in Cyberpunk, and straight away I'm like, maybe they're right. Maybe there was a bug all this time. It wasn't like I was panicking thinking we got it wrong, because I know we published similar data to the vast majority and we tested the way that people who were buying these would be using them. So it's not really our fault. But at the same time, I did want them to be better because, as I said at the start of this conversation, I want the products to be good so I can recommend them. Me and you are enthusiasts.
We want everything to be I want everything twice as strong as it really is for fun. I mean,
exactly. So I was like, people don't get this, but I was really rooting for Zen 5 to be a success, not because I'm an AMD fanboy or whatever the reasons you come up with. It's because I want Zen 5 to be great, and then I want Arrow Lake to be even greater. Keep the ball rolling with great products. That's what I want. So yeah, I was like, oh my God, this is good. We're seeing some of the games were crazy, the performance gains. So I got to the end of my testing and it was more than 10% faster than the 7700X. And I thought, oh, awesome. That's not amazing, but that's something. We got 20% or 30% for the previous generation. And so, 10% is better than 3%. So great. But then I thought, hang on, don't go publishing anything. Don't make any tweets. Don't make any posts. Maybe just verify this with the 7700X first, just to make sure that there's no funny business going on here, which AMD didn't suggest to do. And I don't even know if they had done. And yeah, I chucked the 7700X in, and then straight away I was seeing the exact same gains, basically. I think it was within 1% overall. So I went from 3% to 4% or something. I was like, well, that's quite the buzzkill. I've done all this testing. I'm going to make a video about it, which AMD didn't want me to do. They didn't want me to go talking about this administrator mode. But I'm like, well, I did all the testing. I verified it. And it's actually a really interesting thing. People should be made aware of it. So I'm making a video about it. But I wanted to be really clear in the video, because the other reason I got the video out is because I knew AMD were talking to multiple members of the tech media, and I know they would have been saying the same thing they were saying to me, which was, this is a Zen 5 specific issue. If you test the 9700X under these conditions and then just go compare that to the data you already have for the 7700X, it'll be much faster. I don't know how long they thought that was going to fly for. So anyway, just wanted to stress in that video that this isn't a silver bullet for Zen 5. It changes absolutely nothing. And that was the first of many hurdles for Zen 5 that changes next to nothing. So this long-winded answer that I'm giving you to answer your question, basically we've got to this point now where a lot of things have been addressed, a lot of things have been discovered, found, worked out. That's great. Dual CCD latency has been improved apparently, and haven't really looked into what that means.
There's some new AGESA too that's supposed to improve things again soon or something. It keeps happening, yeah. Yeah,
so, and AMD sent me a slide the other day, with all the Zen 5s getting better was basically the subject. And it was like DDR5 8000 supported 800 series chipsets, new latency improvement for, dual CCD models. And it was all these things that have been happening. But realistically, it doesn't change much or anything really. So for a part like the 9700X, there's there's no new information. There's been a whole heap of like disable SMT. That solves it. Nope, that doesn't
That
solve
old
it.
thing. Every generation, there's always some conspiracy that leads to that being some magic bullet or something.
Yeah, the IMC's better now. You can use high speed. No, that's not a thing. So there was a whole heap of stuff. And like, I don't mean to have a go at anyone. Like, I get it. Like, I was searching for answers as well. And I've said it publicly on our own podcast. I was coping. Like, I was in full cope mode while reviewing this. I'm like, no, it has to be more exciting than this. It has to be better than this. And again, not because I'm an AMD fan. I just want fun, exciting products from any of the brands, hopefully all of them, to keep the ball rolling, keep things exciting, keep enthusiasm high. Because when you get disappointing release after disappointing release, it's hard to do those 18-hour days, 7 days a week to prepare for the next launch. And I'm kind of burnt out at the moment, to be honest, on the Zen 5 stuff. Like, I almost don't want to talk about it, period, because it's just been this never-ending, this improves Zen 5, or you've got it wrong, and all the various different angles that come. But yeah, look, if I was to review Zen 5 today, I would say it's very disappointing. And based on expectations set by AMD, we're still happy to call it a flop. That's what we still believe. Like, and again, the product works on its own. It's a good product, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't deliver what AMD clearly said it would deliver, and compared to discounted Zen 4 parts, it's not worth buying. That's it in a nutshell.
This piece of content is proudly sponsored by Odoo. Odoo is a one-stop shop for managing basically all of the annoying parts of your business. They have apps for accounting, sales, website building, and much more. Like, for example, if I wanted to make a new blog for Moore's Law is Dead, it is very easy to do with Odoo. You just start with a few prompts, choose a style, confirm what you'll use the site for, and then boom, it just throws several options together in front of you and you go, yeah, I like that one, and then you are off. Just like that, I had a blog where I could talk about decisions being made by Pat at Intel. And if I want to add images, they have a whole roster of easily searchable images that you can pull from to put on your website. And they even have something called Copywriter AI, where they will take what you've typed and hone it and make the wording more persuasive if that's what you want, saving you effort sprucing up your stuff. And you know what? That was free. That's right. Your first app is free for life with unlimited hosting for that website, free support, and the domain you choose is also free for a year. And with that same email address, you can create multiple databases, meaning multiple individual websites that don't need to be connected to each other as well. So if you're interested in checking out Odoo, follow the directions and the links below to get the best deal on it. And remember, that first app you use is free, and clicking on that link below, just doing even that, helps the channel a ton. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out Odoo today. Yeah, I mean, you have to admit, though, like, and a lot of my opinion, or one opinion that I've just hammered over and over recently, is just like, there was absolutely no reason for AMD to launch Zen 5 before, let's even just say, they were ready. I mean, the fact that they said that they hadn't tested the 9700X yet, it's worse if they're not lying, and I don't actually think they are in that case. I would guess they just, someone or some team, or maybe someone at AMD had, but maybe the person you're talking to didn't know a team that had, like, this lack of communication. Mm-hmm. Like, wait for the dual CCD. Why? Mm-hmm. Why? No one cares. Arrow Lake isn't out yet. Zen 4 is selling record numbers. Just launch it end of September, beginning of October. You're still launching first. Everyone's mad at Intel for Raptor Lake issues. Like, there was absolutely no reason to launch before. At a minimum, right, they're ready to tell you what they know. Like, and I don't understand how that happened. You have to admit, like, at a minimum, if they could at least talk to you in a coherent way, that would have helped day one review sentiment, right? At least a bit.
Yeah. Well, it would have, like I said, removed a lot of that frustration that we're all feeling, where we didn't actually know whether there was something wrong, what we were getting. Ultimately, I think it would have provided a softer landing for Zen 5. It wouldn't have changed the recommendation from a consumer perspective. We still would have said, these CPUs work. They've got some positives. It's a very minor incremental upgrade. At current pricing, don't buy them. Pricing will eventually filter down. It still has a lot of the negative aspects where the fact that it's not moving along AM5, for example. So if you've invested in an AM5 to get that sweet upgrade path, the first step's been hugely disappointing. So Zen 6 not only has to definitely be on AM5, it has to provide a substantial performance improvement to warrant that investment into it. So yeah, but it definitely seemed rushed, and it could have been executed much more smoothly, but that's something AMD doesn't always seem to like to do. And it, in their defense, some of the stuff, I mean, I know like if the dual CCD latency is actually a real issue and not something that...
Which I've seen mixed results on very early testing with that too. I mean, it is an issue, obviously. There are some apps where it improves.
Yeah.
But I've seen some apps where it doesn't make a big difference. So I assume, I think you probably heard me say this, like, I think there's a chance just eventually, once all of the things remove the edge cases, it'll probably look closer to what they were expecting. But I don't know for sure. And I wouldn't bet on it being as good as the best way they portrayed it.
No. Yeah, I think it's fair to say if they had have taken a bit more time, they definitely could have had a smoother launch. Some of the bugs, it's like, you know, you can be harsh on them for having issues. Intel's released things with issues before, and so is Nvidia, mind you. So it happens to all of these companies. They're like, we fully accept they're extremely complicated. The PC platform, the PC ecosystem is extremely diverse. There's so many different memory kits and graphics cards and motherboards and software and things that can throw a spanner in the works. So to be able to discover every possible scenario prior to launch, it's just not realistic. So these companies should be doing the best they can do to hopefully iron out the obvious stuff. But then, you know, you're going to find some programs that have issues with a new architecture or something, and that'll require some sort of software update or firmware update or whatever it is to solve it. So you've got to expect teething issues. It's just, you know, it's early adopter pain. So that's fine. It was more, I think really, I think the damage was done before the reviews came, right? If they hadn't have shown slides with the 9700X being, I think it was 6 or 7% faster than a 14700K on average for gaming, which they walked back in the blog post. They're now saying at absolute best, it's parity. And if you nerf the crap out of Intel, you know, we can be faster, which I'm not even sure if that's true, but there's no point doing that testing because why? But I think if they had have really come out of the gate announcing Zen 5, incremental upgrade for desktop users. You know, this is really a server development AI focused product because, you know, that's where the money is.
There you go. You could say AI a lot too. That's great.
Yep. So they can say that's what it's focused on because that's the reality of the situation. For gamers, there's no huge gains here compared to Zen 4, but, you know, it's a little bit of an upgrade. You know, there are some improvements to be had, and pretty much leave it at that. I mean, you can do a bit more marketing speak to dress it up a bit more if you want, but I'd be careful with the 10%, 16% IPC sort of claims, and, you know, showing one example. I think it was Far Cry 6. They said it was 10% faster in that example, which I don't even know if it was in my testing, but that they sort of led us to believe that gaming was going to be about 10%. And then, you know, you've seen the slides compared to the 14700K and the 1400K, which just absolutely, I don't know where they, well, apparently they limited them at 125 watts or something and used stock memory, or I can't remember what they did to get those numbers. I'm not even sure how you do it. But had they not done all of that and they had have set realistic expectations that everybody was going to work out anyway, then it would have been received better. But then, I don't know, how many people really watched? Well, it's kind of answers itself, right? Yeah, because the sales were crap, right? You can say, oh, not everyone watches Harbor Unboxed and Gamers Nexus and the other 10,000 reviewers out there. I mean, I don't know how many reviews there were, but there were a lot, right? And I think it's the word of mouth thing as well. Like you'll have you know, in a circle, you'll have the tech friend out of the gamers or whatever. Because, you know, I've got a heap of friends that game on PC and the vast majority of them have no idea about the PC hardware. They just want to play the game. So they're like, which one do I get? And they always go to the one guy in the group that knows a thing about computers. And if he's saying, don't get Zen 5, get Zen 4, get a 700X3D or whatever, not that this is a big loss for AMD, mind you, they're still buying AMD hardware. But I think that propagates through, all the various different levels of consumerism, people who buy these things. So, but whatever it was, I mean, we spoke to some of the retailers and they said that the Zen 5 day one sales were bad. And they said the first month of sales didn't amount to what I think it was Zen 4 sold on day one, and Zen 4 wasn't very good.
No, it wasn't that great.
Yeah.
It was a below expectations launch.
No, and Zen 4 blew Zen 5 out of the water, apparently. And then Zen 3 was insane. Like, I think they were saying one of the biggest retailers here in Australia were telling me that in the first hour, they sold more Zen 3 CPUs, and they did all of Zen 5. It was one SKU as well. The most popular Zen 3 SKU, they sold more of those in the first hour than they did all of Zen 5 in the first month, which is just wild. Like, that is pretty crazy. I know there's other economic circumstances going on, but that's...
Yeah, I mean, Zen 3 was during shortages and a hype cycle. But, I'm glad you brought up the bad sales, because on the last Loose Sense live stream I did, I had a section where I divulged what I was told from retailers. And no, you're not alone. The people I talked to, one person said, this is the worst... they technically said AMD. This is the worst AMD launch we've ever seen. It's selling worse than Bulldozer did in its first month for us.
Wow.
So, and I had someone else tell me far more details, actually, someone higher up in the supply chain who said that they're not selling. Like, they're just not selling. Like, to a store, they're not selling. Like, the 9950X, for obvious professional use reasons, is selling some, but not good. You can't even say that one's selling okay, to the point that like retailers are trying to send some stock in their back rooms back to distributors who's trying to ship it back to AMD, and AMD's rejecting it. And they're getting really pissed at AMD, and that this is probably going to show up to some degree on AMD's earnings. And that like this is like bad, actually. Like it really is materially affecting them. I know Zen 4's selling, but
that's right. That's why it's so bad as well, because they actually have a really good value CPU line to sell you instead. So, and whereas with Bulldozer, that's probably less of a that probably wasn't the case.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Bulldozer first 8 cores,
it's a bit of hype.
But and I think that the reason this still hurts them, though, even with Zen 4 selling, is they still made all of these chips. I heard this was going to be the biggest launch in AMD's history, and I think it was. They certainly were everywhere, and it cost them so much money to just have those rotting on shelves. So this is a problem AMD has to solve. And to add insult to injury, I mean, I don't know if you saw, but I put out, I mean, I have slides of the 9800X3D. Like I've got a document that I couldn't show for obvious reasons that said 2024 products, 9800X3D, does not list the 9950X3D. And it's like, so wait a second. I don't know if this is a last minute change because they realized they need to do something, but at a minimum, what this tells you is they have Vcache coming this year. They always had Vcache coming this year if they wanted to. And I think it didn't even need to be day one, although certainly if they're going to launch, the rumor out there is, I haven't heard a specific date myself. The rumor out there is that the 9800X3D might launch in October. If that happens, then I still think they should have actually waited to launch everything on the same day. But even if they couldn't, I would say, why didn't they at least have some slide for the 9800X3D that's like estimated, 10-20% boost in gaming? And then for the base models, yeah, you could just say 16% IPC increase. None of it really applies to gaming, unfortunately. And I think every review would have said, hey, it's 10%, 20%, sometimes 30% better in these apps. But remember, this isn't for gamers, and we know the 9800X3D should be that good. And I just feel like so much of the focus would have meaningfully not been on gaming for obvious reasons. But of course, you're going to focus on gaming on a lot of websites. And I don't know how AMD didn't see this mistake coming, especially when Zen 4 sales didn't pick up until the Vcache models, and I mean, even the non-Vcache models didn't sell until the Vcache models launched.
Mhm.
I guess I might be ranting instead of asking you a question, but
I
wonder if you agree. Like, they clearly could have it out now. Why didn't they tell us the gaming models so that wasn't the focus?
There's so much behind the scenes stuff with timing and that I'm unaware of. For example, where are they at with the 3D Vcache versions of Zen 5? So, yeah, where are they in the development of that? How, what sort of concrete benchmark data do they have to make any of those claims? That's the thing I really wonder about, because they're making these claims of Zen 5 well in advance. And then by the time it came around for us to get them, they seem to have no idea how they actually performed. And we're not talking like, there's no like local Australian branch for AMD. There's no team here or anything. So we're straight to the US team. It's like global AMD we deal with there. We're getting the results from them. And yeah, again, I was like, what? I've got the CPU and I'm testing it. How have you not tested it yet? Like, I would have had all of this stuff locked in weeks in advance. So again, speaks to what you were saying earlier. Do all of that legwork and then, delay it or whatever it is, but release it when you have everything worked out. You're not just running. But again, I don't know how they made those performance claims in advance and then didn't seem to know what was going on. And they made that blog post where they were saying it's 5% faster and then it's, 7 to 8% faster. And they said 9% faster on the same blog post. That was weird as well. So 9800X3D, I expect them to rush that forward now because of how Zen 5's flopped. With Arrow Lake coming, they want to head that off and sort of maintain some sort of sales dominance if they can. They don't want to leave the door open for Intel, even though they sort of have. They want to shut it as much as they can. So yeah, they don't want to release slides now announcing it, saying it's 30% faster than whatever, and then we get it, and then it's only 15% faster than whatever it is.
They can't afford to do that again.
Because they did that, with the 700 XTX? They said it was like 40% faster than a 6950 XT, and it ended up being...
they made it look like it was 60% faster.
I can't remember what the numbers were, but they officially said it was some percentage faster, whether it was 60 or 40, and then it ends up being 20 or 30. I can't remember, but basically it was well off. And when you make those claims, people such as yourself and other reviewers, they report on the news and they say, okay, so AMD's saying it's 40% faster than a 6950 XT. Well, we know how fast it is then, because we can go to somewhere like Harbor Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, Tech Power Up. Tech Power Up always have good data on that sort of stuff. And you look at the 6950 XT, you add 40%. Oh, there it is. It's an RTX 4090. That's great. So they've got to be careful with those claims. They really have to be careful with them. They don't want to oversell well in advance, because it just sets expectations wrong. And again, like, our reviews aren't based on expectations set in advance by AMD. It's certainly part of it, because
it's impossible to not be influenced by what they say.
It's not so much that we're influenced. It's expectations set by the people who will be watching the review. So it's sort of out of our hands at that point. It's all over places like Reddit and wherever else. And so people already know what to expect. So we can't then create this review ignoring what you're all expecting. We're like, okay, so you guys have been told it's this is what you're expecting. Bad news. Like, you kind of have to head that off. So it's on them to set the right expectation, and then we can go into the review. And again, with Zen 5, if the right expectation was set, we would have gone, look, AMD's already told us, guys, it's not super exciting, but it works. There's some small improvements, and if you happen to leverage any of the applications that it does really provide good gains in, then it'll be a cool upgrade for you. But it would have just been one of those sort of reviews, whereas the expectations have set where it's going to be pretty great, and then it's not, and you see how it goes.
Rad Kusakis writes, and it says, hello, or Kalispera, Steve and Tom. I believe that's in Greek. He says, what could they have done differently? I think we kind of talked about that, but he goes, what can they do now to get sales going again?
There's only one option: discounts, axe pricing. And really, the problem AMD have with that is they've and I think they've started doing it with the 7800X 3D. I think they know this. They've worked it out, and that's why the 700X 3D has gone bye-bye. It's disappeared. They don't want to launch a 9800X 3D into a market where a 7800X 3D's $70, $80 US cheaper, and whatever percentage that works out to be. But I have no idea, mind you, what the 9800X 3D will do. Is it going to be a couple of percent faster? Is it the Zen 5% thing again, relative to the 7800X 3D, of course? Or will there be some other unforeseen changes, maybe a bit more frequency, headroom due to the better temperatures? And I'm not sure. I have no insight whatsoever. But
I know it's clocked faster. I just don't know what the speed is. My suspicion would be that it's believable it's actually 10% faster clocked, but I don't know. Maybe it's 5%. You know,
10% would probably, if you get a 10% frequency advantage, that might give you in the realm of like a 7% performance gain on average there, and then you get a couple more percent, which may, if you're 10% faster than the 7800X 3D, that's pretty good. That's a fast CPU, right? It's probably going to be the fastest gaming CPU, so that's pretty good. But if it's 40% more expensive than a 7800X 3D, it's like, some people will certainly pay 40% more for 10% more performance. That's always what happens at the high end. But there'll be other people who'll be like, I'm just going to pay, what was it, $330 US or something for a 700X 3D? Like
that's what it was. I can't really find it anymore for less than $400 or $500. So they're making sure it's not 40% more at this point.
Yeah, it was over a week ago now. It disappeared at those prices. Probably 2 weeks ago now. So they've planned that one ahead. And so what was the actual question? Sorry about this.
Well, how can they fix this? Because my opinion is, and I agree, there's no way around this. Like, guys, I just think you need to not be as aggressive as you probably wanted to be with the X3D pricing, and you got to drop the non-X3D. Like, at least, probably more than what I'm saying, but like 16 core for 600, 12 for 500, and the 9700X needs to go to 330 or lower. I mean, that's when it sold at Zen 4. And the reason I say this isn't because it's so easy, I think, to armchair quarterback and just be like, I think they should do this because it'd be cheaper for me and that'd be good for me. But the apocalyptic things I'm hearing about no one buying this tells me they're going to have to do something here, even if, you're going to have to give a rebate for $20 to $50 for everything you've shipped because it's just sitting there. So I think they need to do that and then be a bit more aggressive than they probably wanted to be with the X3Ds. And they just need to get them out there, and just there needs to be a reboot, new reviews, new pricing. It performs better than it used to, and it needs to happen on day one and just be the new narrative. And it's what they should have done from the start, but
Yeah, at this point, price correction is really the only way to go about it. And I've seen people say, oh, come on, you reviewers, of course the new stuff's going to cost more. The other stuff's been discounted to make way for the new stuff. And there's some truth in that, but at the same time, Zen 4 certainly hasn't been fire sale. Like, they've been at these prices for 12 months now. So that creates a separate issue. So it's not like Zen 4 was selling very near to MSRP right up until the release of Zen 5, and then it got heavily discounted to get rid of stock, and then Zen 5 came in. I think if that was the case, reviewers wouldn't have honored those fire sale prices. It would have been like, well, look, for 90% of this product's life, you paid, let's say 20% less than the MSRP. Not, what was it, 40% or something? So, or I think it was more than that actually. But yeah, you can't heavily discount a product and then have the MSRP be the MSRP.
There's been how many generations have all these companies been doing this where they're like, no, the RTX 3090 still is an MSRP of $1,500, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Exactly.
What are you doing?
Yeah, you can only claim that, like I said, if it's a couple of weeks, maybe a month prior to the next generation coming out, that you do that heavy discount to clear out the inventory. But yeah, so basically, at this point for Zen 5, it comes down to the price. And Tim and I have talked about this. It really has to get down to Zen 4 pricing because for most users, for those of you that primarily game, but maybe do a few other things on your PC, but for most users, Zen 5, it's a very, very small upgrade. So you really want to pay Zen 4 money for it. You don't really want to pay much of a premium at all. It's like $10, maybe $20 you could justify just for getting the new thing.
I mean, if it was the same price, I would certainly choose Zen 5, especially after the updates.
Yep. Yeah, the same price, it's good to go. But at, I think, what did it launch at? 40% more or something? It's like no deal.
Than what it was selling for in the market? Yeah, it depends on the model. I mean, some of them were like 20% more, but it depends which one you're talking about. I mean, AMD would love to say the 9700X is, it's only 20%, 30% more than the 7700X, and neglect that the 7700 might be going for 190 right now, which that's what you should compare it to, and then it's almost double the price.
Yeah.
Or exactly double the price. All right, so Soldier789 writes in and says, hello, you two. At $400, will you declare the 9800 X3D as the go-to option for high-end gaming, or would the conclusion be to wait till $350? Or what if it's $450 at launch?
Yeah, well, this ties in with the way AMD's played this. It's my understanding that you really can't buy a 7800 X3D anymore for, I think they're $420 now. So if you like, they've learned from the mistake, right? They've gone, well, we're just not doing that then. So when the reviews come out, there's no alternative. We're not cutting our own lunch. Like, if you want the fastest X3D CPU, you have to buy this new thing. There's no alternative. So I can't really sit there and go, well, just buy the 7800 X3D. It's $330 or $350 because it's not. And I don't think it ever will be again now. So if they do have inventory of that CPU to clear, they're going to hold on to it till well after the review cycle's done. And then they'll flood the market with cheap 700 X3Ds again. And then they'll be like, oh, just buy them instead. So that may be something they do. I don't know whether they have more 7800 X3Ds to sell or not. So I don't know if they've created this artificial supply issue where they're just holding on to them and not releasing them and waiting till after. And then once everyone says, oh yeah, buy the the 9800 X3D, buy that. That's a great value CPU at $400 US or $450 US. And then a week later, the 7800 X3Ds turn up again at $350 or $330. Couldn't tell you.
To be fair, I've heard from retailers actually a week or two ago, even, or a month ago, I've been hearing that the 7800 X3D, if you need to RMA it, it might take a month to get an RMA.
Okay.
So my suspicion is they really have ended production on that one. But at the same time, Zen 5 X3D and Zen 5 don't cost any more to make than Zen 4. It's almost the same node. Actually, TSMC has cut prices on some of these things. Actually, the die is a little smaller than it was for Zen 5 and for Zen 4. So, I think they actually have cut production. At the same time, this definitely doesn't cost more to make than Zen 4. And it probably costs less than Zen 4 cost when they first manufactured it. So if you were to see it for $450, I'm pretty sure they're making more money than at least Zen 4 X3D did when it came out. Later, I don't know, but when it came out, I think they are.
I think the X3D chips, if they do end up coming in later the month, let's say late October, they have the advantage of no expectations. So, the expectation is right that they're going to be 5% faster, let's say, than a 700 X3D. So if they are 5% faster than a 700 X3D, and they're like $400, and it's the only option, it's like, okay, cool. I guess that works.
If it ends up 15% faster,
then it's like, cool. Well, this is better than expected. So I think, I think that'll come off a lot better. It's going to launch a lot better, especially because AMD has clearly learnt how to handle this, and you're not going to have, as I said, $330 700 X3Ds, because that would make a pretty rough landing for a $400 plus 9800 X3D that's 10% faster or less.
Yeah, so you basically answered half of a question here from Chris Stritch, but he continues because he says, putting it another way, if the 9800 X3D is a solid improvement over the 7800 X3D in gaming, would you expect it to sell well regardless of the poor Zen 5 sales and reviews? But similarly for Arrow Lake, will Arrow Lake need to beat the 9800X 3D in gaming to have good sales, in your opinion?
Well, that's a tough one. Yeah, I really hope Arrow Lake's very good because it needs to be. That's a tough one to predict with everything that's happened with Intel. I mean, Intel already wasn't selling well. They weren't. They were getting, for the last probably few years, they've been getting pretty dominated in the retail market. So, I'm not talking laptops or anything like that, but definitely for, retailers. So if you look at the Amazon top CPU sale list for the last 2 years, it's just
yeah, I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, top 10's just been all Ryzen, and it's gotten worse. But Ryzen has been very dominant for many years now on that list, which I remember looking back in probably somewhere between Zen 2 and Zen 3 and thinking, wow, that is crazy. Seeing the top 10 dominated by Ryzen Pro. They were so cheap, but still, that wasn't something I could have ever imagined happening, especially in a relatively short period of time. But yeah, I honestly, I can't really answer this question because I struggle to imagine a scenario where Arrow Lake, where people just flock to it, given all the 13th and 14th gen issues. I mean, again, they weren't even selling very well prior to the huge stability drama and all of that. And that people far and wide have heard about that. Like, I'm not saying everyone that is going to buy a computer knows that there was those stability issues, but a lot of people have heard about them. So, yeah, I mean, expecting Arrow Lake to be much faster than a 9800X 3D for gaming, that's I would say that's very unlikely, very unrealistic. I'd like it to be true. That would be awesome because, yeah, AMD would really have to work pretty hard on Zen 6.
Well, so this is interesting. I'm looking at the best CPU sellers right now, and this has happened a few times where, yeah, I look at the top 10, it's all AMD, but then every now and then I'll see Intel sneak in, and I remember one time I noticed it, and I went, oh, well, Intel's working their way back in there. Maybe that's because people are mad at Zen 5. For example, it's not in the top 10 anymore, but the i5 12400KF or
that's
something.
Been a good one. Usually the Core i3 sneaks in as well.
So, but then I looked at the price. It was selling for like $120 or something. And I was like,
that's a good deal.
It's a good deal, but the only way Intel's getting into the top 10 is if they sell their stuff for half the price of AMD. And right now, I haven't seen this for a while. The i9 14900K is in the top 10, but its price is $460. So they're selling it for substantially less than what they would want to be comparing it against. And I think that tells you what's going on with Intel's mindshare, where they have to sell i5s for, Zen 3 6-core pricing for anyone to want one anymore. I think, these people that make the argument no one watches these reviews, I think they do. I think more and more there's something going on here where people clearly do watch the reviews more now than maybe they did 10 years ago.
Well, that's definitely the case. But like I said, I think it's also, you'll have friend groups that or forums or whatever it is that have, they rely on a person to sort of work this out. And if that person is the one that's telling them, buy this CPU, then they're not going to go buy a different one. So the reach is probably more than what you'd expect based on just, I don't know, view counts on videos, for example.
Yeah, and as for beating the 9800X 3D, yeah, I mean, I did a video on this a month ago where I was like, well, let's just assume a best case scenario. Let's assume there's like a, 15% IPC increase with Arrow Lake, and it's perfect. It perfectly translates to gaming per clock. And even if you add that up, it gets pretty close to like a 7800X 3D because of how far behind Raptor Lake's fallen over time against Vcache. And if we even just assume like a 5% uplift to 9800X 3D, it is very hard for me to see Arrow Lake beating that. I've had recent benchmarks that have emerged, like Cinebench testing, which isn't gaming, but some proxy for single threading performance, and it was higher than I expected. So I think there's a chance it trades blows, but I find it hard to believe Arrow Lake beats the 9800 X3D by 20%, because that would mean it's like 30% faster or something than Raptor Lake before Raptor Lake got all the nerf patches. So it maybe doesn't break. It probably still will.
Yeah, I mean, there's other considerations as well. So you've got stuff like power. I know gamers don't care deeply about power efficiency, but it also has to be somewhat reasonable. But I think, if Arrow Lake is very competitive in terms of performance, let's just say it is, the top SKUs faster for gaming. So Intel reclaims, let's say, the performance crown for gaming. So if they manage that, which would be super impressive, that would be great. And power consumption is reasonable. Like, not 100 watts more than an AMD for gaming. Like, let's say 50 watts.
It might be 100. It might be like 250, right? I imagine you're expecting that, right? 225 watts, 250 watts or something, which kind of is 100 watts more.
It is.
It's not 400 watts, but...
Yeah, well, I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. But better power efficiency with better performance, and I'm asking a lot there, but that would be good. Obviously, you've got the new socket, but for me, AMD's platform longevity, broad platform compatibility, whatever you want to call it, that's sort of gone out the window for me. It's no longer something that I'll be really talking about for this matchup, because we don't even know if Zen 6 is going to be on AM5. Now I know that people will be like, you're crazy, of course it's going to be.
I would say I'm 90%, 95% sure it will be.
Probably right. But again, this comes back to what you were saying earlier about why doesn't AMD just tell us that the 9800 X3D is coming? Why the hell hasn't AMD said Zen 6 is on AM5? Because that would be... Well, if they say that, that's...
Yeah.
First of all, a lot of people are expecting it to be, and it should be, but we don't know. And Tim's made some good arguments for why it may not be. You have a hard time convincing me it won't be. I'm in full coat mode on that one. But yeah, just say it. So, but anyway, that aside, they haven't said it. So you've got this new Intel platform. You've got AM5, which we don't know the future of. Probably one more generation. Beyond that, don't know. Intel should certainly have at least one more generation on that socket. So therefore, it's null and void. Like they've both got another generation coming, we think, on the socket. Intel might come out and say we're going to do 3 generations on this socket, which, again, that's probably not something to get terribly excited about, because they could just refresh the second generation like they did with 14th gen. AMD's also shot themselves in the foot a bit with that one as well, because we got accustomed to, we got Zen, and that was pretty exciting, had some issues, but pricing was good, and it was a step in the right direction. And then we got Zen Plus, which tightened up DRAM latency and core-to-core latency and made a good step forward. And we're like, okay, same socket, this is all cool. And we knew there was more Zen coming, and Zen 2 was great. And then we got Zen 3, and then we got the X3D, and all of a sudden AM4 is like the greatest socket ever. You get AM5, big investment to get over to AM5, expensive motherboards, DDR5 memory, all that sort of stuff. Then Zen 5 comes along, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're pretty used to like 20% gains generation on generation as sort of a minimum. What's Zen 6 going to bring? And now you're a lot less excited about, like, platform longevity means nothing if the platform barely progresses over a 5-year period. It's like you bought in day one. Like if you bought a 7800 X3D and a 9800 X3D is 10% faster, that upgrade's not happening, is it?
Yeah.
And then if Zen 6 is another 10%, it's like, I could upgrade my CPU for 20%, which is a reasonable performance gain on the CPU side. Or I could just hold on to this thing and wait for the next platform if, let's say Zen 7 is on a new socket. So you go to AM6 presumably, and then the platform longevity meant nothing for you. Whereas the previous generation, I think from like a 3600 to a 5800 X3D, which you could get to close to the same price by the end of the 5800 X3D discounts, it was 80% on average gaming performance uplift, which is just wild. So anyway, we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, that's right. It was crazy upgrade, but that was AM4 for you. It was really cool.
All Jesse wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to CDkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, CDkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at CDkeyoffer.com today. Well, so it's interesting because when it comes to Arrow Lake, years ago, the rumors were that, Arrow Lake's 8 plus 16, and then Arrow Lake refresh was going to hopefully be 8 plus 32. I put out a video that's gone. I actually almost wonder if some of the ring bus flaws carried over to that, and they realized we can't do it with any more cores, but who knows why they really canceled it. I also heard it cost way too much money. And then the narrative is, and what I've heard, I've seen other people say this too, that seems like Arrow Lake refresh may just be like kind of like 14th gen, but a better AI engine as well. And now there's rumors coming out that that's canceled. And so then I go, well, wait a second. If Arrow Lake refresh is canceled, which I can't say that I know it is. I'm sure someone who listens to this that I talk to will message me and say, hey, Tom, it actually is or it isn't. But let's say hypothetically it is. And then I wonder, I always heard Nova Lake probably isn't coming to it. What if Intel doesn't come out and say LGA 1851 is going to get multiple generations firmly? Like maybe they just don't say a word about it. And it seems like these rumors of refreshes and generations coming to 1851 or not coming to 1851 pick up in veracity. Would that change your opinion, though, if you heard, oh, this might be a single generation platform? Yeah,
not necessarily, because I could be wrong in saying this, but I'm pretty sure Intel traditionally or historically hasn't really made claims about future support. It's just been that, that TikTok type strategy where we've just, when 12th gen came along, we were just accepted that, we'll probably get a 13th gen on this socket and then 14th gen will be a new socket. I don't think they specifically said that 13th gen would also be on LJ 1700. I could be wrong, but I think they just...
I don't know for sure. I don't remember them saying that.
I don't think they do. But anyway, my personal expectations with Intel is we just get a thing and we just assume there'll be another thing on that socket and then there'll be a new socket. They sort of said they stopped the TikTok thing ages ago, but that's sort of pretty much how it's gone for many generations now. Again, 14th gen wasn't a new generation. It was a straight refresh. It shouldn't have been called 14th gen, but whatever. I honestly think that the whole socket thing isn't going to play a big role for these upcoming reviews. Without knowing the future of, because AMD did that sneaky thing, right, where they came out and they said, oh no, we're going to, they were really excited about this when they told me, because they said, this is a thing you and Tim have been talking about in your Q&As that we should announce. It's an ace up our sleeve. It's something we should commit to. And we're actually going to double down. So I think it was, what did they say, 2027 plus is AM5 support. Plus. But they didn't actually specify any architectures or anything like that, which I get, some of these things you can't do because you're not exactly sure how they're going to play out or whatever. But it doesn't, we've seen them use that language because they're still saying AM4 is the longest supported platform. They're still releasing new CPUs on it, which...
Like the 5900 XT, amazing new CPUs.
Which I guess technically is true, but also no new architectures have found their way since Zen 3. I mean, the X3D, you could argue, was substantial enough to be almost a new generation, but no. So that language just... And I guess that's Tim's concern. They haven't specifically said what will be supported, and it could be that Zen 6 finds itself on a new socket, but AMD are like, no, we didn't lie. We're still going to keep binning CPUs and releasing them on AM5, so it'll be supported for till 2028, and we did what we said we were going to do. Look, I'm not trying to agitate anyone. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying without actually any official concrete information, we have no idea what is actually going to happen there. Again, my personal expectation is that Zen 6 will be on AM5, and I'll be very, very upset if it's not. But yeah, Tim's sitting back going, I'm not so sure. So ultimately, we don't know.
I know Zen 6 moves to a new layout, so the comparison would be Zen 1 to Zen 2, where it's like, finally, you can tell the difference between them by looking at them. It's a different, shaped CPU. And that Zen 5's memory controller just didn't pan out, which I think the testing is kind of bared. It's kind of been a letdown. And that Zen 6, it didn't plan to do this, but now it is planning to. They basically had to rebuild the memory controller from the ground up. So when I hear that, I would go, okay, well, good. Because the main reason I would be worried about Zen 6 not coming to AM5 is it doesn't have enough bandwidth. Like, it's just not enough. It needs DDR6 or something. But I've also heard Zen 6 has two variants, one with DDR5 and one with DDR6. I don't know why they would do that unless it's coming to AM5. But again, until they say they are doing this for sure, I do agree that there's at least this minimum amount of, well, they haven't technically said it, which feels weird, although the counterpoint to that would be they don't want you to think about Zen 6. They want you to buy Zen 5. But argue that that opportunity's gone, AMD. I think you got to get people excited about Zen 6 and hope they buy Zen 5 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, consumers in general aren't that patient. If you're like, well, we've got this really cool architecture coming in 2 years, people aren't going to be like, well, that settles it for me. I'm just going to sit around and wait 2 years. Like, most people are ready. They're like, I've got money. I want to part with it now. Give me product. So I don't think that's too much of a concern. But yeah, at the end of the day, we don't know. So I can't review a product saying, oh, well, maybe, although Arrow Lake a little bit faster, power efficiency's improved, let's just say that's the situation. I can't then say, but platform longevity, AM5's, committed to be supported till 2027 plus, so that's still the way I would personally go. I can't really say that because I don't know until I have that information. So we only really say those things when we know for sure.
I think it would behoove AMD to announce it, though, before Arrow Lake comes out. So on Arrow Lake review days, everyone's like, and AMD just announced Zen 6 is definitely coming to AM5, and they're asking Intel to confirm if anything's coming to LGA 1851. I think that would be a smart move.
Yeah. If Intel didn't, my assumption would be that there'll be some incremental upgrade. I mean, even 13th gen was probably a bit more substantial than I expected it to be. So, I mean, if they could do like a 13th... Well, if
it worked. I mean, now we know that it doesn't really work. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely some issues there. Anyway, it's a lot of hypothetical situation stuff. At the end of the day, we've just got to get the CPUs, test them, review them, see what they do, and all that sort of stuff. But I think based on all available information, the platform support thing won't be heavily weighted in my review anyway, because unless something changes between now and the reviews, of course.
So speaking of platform reviews, you just reviewed the X870E, some of those motherboards. I know you put a video about that. Well, I guess by the time this comes out, it'll probably be yesterday. So generally speaking, what do you think about X870E and X870? I mean, how would you summarize those products?
Yeah, a lot of people said to me at around Computex time, they were all a bit perplexed as to why there wasn't more 800 series motherboards at Computex, why they were, because everyone expected them to be launched with Zen 5, right? That's kind of how they introduce a new architecture, even if it's the same socket. It's a bit easier there without BIOS updates and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, and a few people said to me, why aren't they doing that? Like, this is really confusing. It doesn't make sense. Why would they be delayed? And I said, well, my expectation is this. They've learnt from Zen 4. There's really nothing new with the 800 series chipsets. They're just making expensive features mandatory, which is going to make the boards really expensive. And what they don't want happening is reviewers reviewing an already expensive part like the 9700X on an expensive 800 series motherboard, which would lead people to believe that you really need the 800 series motherboard to get the most out of Zen 5. And these boards are going to be expensive. So you start doing cost per frame and you've got $300 motherboard versus, $180 motherboard or $150 motherboard. So already Zen 5's got like $100, $150 US premium associated with it. And then the CPU prices, and all of a sudden it's like twice as much to buy a Zen 5 CPU, which just makes Zen 5 look even worse. So they did not want the expensive motherboards sort of sullying the Zen 5 launch, which is kind of funny in hindsight, I suppose. But so that's why they went about it that way. I'm certain of it, because there's no other reason to delay a refresh chipset. Like, it's the same thing. And USB 4 already existed on 600 series boards, so there's actually nothing new here at all. You could argue the only new stuff is the actual AGESA code, which again could be just applied to 600 series boards because of the same thing. So it's given board makers a chance to refresh their boards, add some new things. We've got like easy, quick release stuff on all primary PCIe times 16 slots, which is really a great feature for reviewers. Don't know how good it is for actual general users.
I've got to fight my desktop to remove the graphics card sometimes.
Yeah, which if you have to do that once every 2 years, if, at most to upgrade your GPU, probably not a big deal. But anyway, they've made it easier. So I guess that's fine. And USB 4 support's nice. I don't know how many people actually need it, but, whatever. So, I mean, I think I said pretty much at the start of my video, I'm like, I can't remember the language I used, but essentially I was saying, well, guys, these are a nothing burger, but we're testing them anyway, which is probably the best way to put it, really. But, yeah, some of the boards have nice upgrades, like the MSI Carbon, for example. The X870E version is much nicer than the X670E version, but I think it costs about $70 US more. So, again, if pricing filters down and they sort of replace each other eventually, then it's like,
over
cool.
time,
we got some slightly better quality motherboards that are still pretty expensive. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to say. I mean, they're probably even less exciting than Zen 5 for general consumers, so
certainly less to talk about.
Yeah, they need not exist for sure. They definitely don't need to exist. Yeah.
Shad Havar writes in and says, "Hi, Steve. Just saw your video on X870E versus X670E. Pretty eye-opening, and I'm glad that I watched it, as I have pretty high-end X670E board in my machine right now. But just for fun, if I suddenly really needed to have two USB 4 ports on my system, would you say it's worth it to get a dedicated card with said USB 4 ports, or the fact that using said card would split my PCIe lanes down to PCIe 5x8 on my GPU not be worth it in your opinion?"
That's a tough one, because obviously it depends on board pricing and everything like that. I think, like in the example of the Carbon, it's already a really expensive motherboard. So it depends on the CPU you're putting in there and how expensive that CPU is. Like, I would gravitate towards the X870E version, not necessarily because it has an X870E chipset, which is a rebranded chipset, but anyway, confusing. Just because, and not even because of the USB 4, just because overall the board is much better equipped. Like, the rear I/O is much better. It's got some nice features on the board that, and some of the toolless M.2 stuff's kind of nicely improved. How much value that adds to you, it's hard to say. But yeah, again, it depends on the cost and all that. And then buying a USB 4 PCIe card, again, it depends on the cost of those. Like, they can be quite expensive. The price of those will come down pretty quickly, I would say, over I don't know, probably till early next year. I expect them to be more widely available at more competitive prices. But then, yeah, as you say, you put that in and then you start splitting lanes, and how much does that matter to you? I don't know. So it's really, it's going to, motherboard reviews are so funny. I was cracking up when I released that video because I got a couple of comments from people saying like, these boards are so dumb. They've got too many M.2s on board. I want more PCIe slots, which I get, right, because you can. I mean, the PCIe slot thing, they have to be correctly positioned for them to even be usable, depending on your graphics card and your case and all that sort of stuff. But I laugh because I get one person saying that, or I think there was like 10 people who said that in the first hour of the video going live. But then I got another 10 people saying, this board has too many or not enough M.2s or too many PCIe, or it has this or it has that. And there are people who are saying the onboard audio isn't good enough. Like it's only got 2 3.5 millimeter audio jacks. I really want 5. And then there's a whole heap of people saying, why even test onboard audio? It's so dumb. And then, the boot time testing, for example, there's a heap of people saying, why even test boot times? It's just absurd. Like, who cares? Like, put your computer to sleep when you're not using it and then wake it up. Like, who cares about boot times? And then there are other people like, this is the best motherboard review I've ever seen because there's boot times. So with motherboards, it's like everyone's very opinionated about them. I guess that's why it's good. There's such a range because some people want more of this. Some people don't want that at all. So it's really hard for me to make a recommendation. People saying, what's the best high-end motherboard? And I'm like, well, these 4 are good. They're all really good. And they have certain strengths. So do you want more high-speed USB ports or do you want more M.2s on board? So it really comes down to what it is you want to do with, and that's the cool thing about the PC platform, right? You work out what it is you want to do. What are your workloads? How do you configure your PC? Do you do streaming? Is it productivity? And depending on what it is that you do, you'll need a certain amount of certain things. So my goal basically with the motherboard testing is just to find which ones are absolutely trash and you shouldn't buy, and then which ones are like pretty good value depending on your needs.
Alex Vega writes in, he says, hi, Tom and Steve. Often when I'm shopping around for motherboards, I tend to find a lot more options for Intel chipsets versus AMD, especially in terms of functionality and aesthetics. I was hoping it would change with AM5 as AMD has garnered more mindshare in the CPU space lately, but I often find the offerings from the big 3 to be a bit lacking. Or maybe big 3, maybe it means big 3 motherboard makers. In particular, when it comes to overclocking focused boards, like only 2 DDR5 slots, more direct power delivery, find options similar to the Apex Encore or ASRock Aqua have been difficult. I was hoping EVGA would release an AM5 board, but, well, we all know where that went. And and I got to parrot this as well because I have a micro ATX system with a 5950X. I'm very happy with the DTX X570 Asus motherboard I have. It's got like an included sound card. It has 2 M.2s, which is most you could get, I think, for the time, and plenty of SATA and stuff. And it fits in my somewhat pretty small case. I can't find them anymore. Like, a reason I might not upgrade to AMD moving forward is I can't find motherboards that fit in micro ATX or ITX with the nicest chipset. I mean, there was that one Asus one where they had like a board outside of it they had to plug in to have the rest of the I/O, which is just ridiculous, a horrible solution. And that's it. That's the only X670E, not even just micro ATX or ITX of either. That's it. That's the only one. I wonder what you think about that, because I think there is a real issue here with AMD choice. And from what I've been told, it's not going to get any better with X870E.
Well, I have no insight into why this is. I am well aware that there are significantly more, like, because I've tested the motherboards, and you test the Z790 motherboards, and there's like 80. And then you test the AMD equivalent, and there's like 40. So quite a big disparity there. It would have to do with behind the scenes deals, for sure, I would say. I don't know what Intel's doing. I don't know if there's some sort of subsidies, or there's definitely some sort of deal going on. And we've seen it with MSI. Like, MSI is shying away from AMD a lot. They've given me no insight into why that is.
I've been told they're on the Intel train moving forward.
Yeah. So and Nvidia. So they've
yes, and Nvidia.
So it could be a situation where they wanted to primarily make GeForce GPUs, which upset AMD, and then maybe AMD kicked them out on the motherboard side. I have no insight and absolutely no idea, so I just want to make that clear. But yeah,
you're on the right track, though, I think, from what I've heard.
Based on how this industry typically works, that sort of thing wouldn't shock me. But yeah, they've got 4 X870 motherboards, X870/X870E, just 4. I think ASRock have twice as many, and then Asus have twice as many again, and Gigabyte have quite a lot as well. So yeah, MSI nowhere on the AMD front, which is unusual. And they're still making a godlike X870E, which means they make like 500 boards or something. But it's a weird situation. But I think because we still do see more Intel boards, even from the likes of Asus and Gigabyte, I think Intel like to do some backdoor deals, let's say. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some moolah getting thrown around there more, which AMD...
Do not make ITX boards or something, or what?
Well, when I went to... I'll tell you this story. I was told not to tell anyone this publicly, but it was so long ago now, and I'll be very vague. But I went to a company that makes network storage gear. And they... I've got to be careful with the details here. They make network gear that uses Intel and AMD CPUs. And the AMD ones, they only made like 2 or 3 models, whereas they made about 20 Intel models. And this is when AMD was getting very competitive. Ryzen was getting very power efficient. Their SoC stuff was quite good. And there was a lot of buzz around Ryzen products. And the actual sort of lead product they had at Computex this year was AMD based. But it was in an absolutely trash color. Like, it looked bad. Whereas the Intel ones were in really sleek colors that integrate well into, whatever it is. Your typical blacks and whites. And let's just say the AMD one was neither black nor white. And I said to him, why do you make it in that color? And they're like, oh, well, you can't tell anyone this, but it's because Intel pays us. And I was like, wow, that's really? I thought they were joking. Like, and then they started darting and looking around going, Intel pays us. We're not allowed to make AMD in black or white. I was like, wow, okay. Weird. But I don't cover networking stuff really, so it was a rabbit hole we went down. But, we know that, we know there was the GeForce Partner Program, right? Mm-hmm. And, that was supposed to be abolished. But MSI made all.
I don't remember the details, but I remember someone telling me that, notice the MSI Slimline came out right before the 7800 XT, and MSI didn't, to my memory, have a 7800 XT at launch. And it's like, guys, connect the dots,
Yeah, and of course I asked MSI about that. They're like, no, that's not a thing, absolutely not a thing. And it's like, but all the evidence suggests it is a thing. Like, nope, just a crazy coincidence on that one. Please don't ask any further questions. And then, now we know, back then, we couldn't have imagined a world where MSI don't really make AMD hardware, but we're quickly heading that way. I mean, as I said, latest chipset, they've got the least amount of motherboards by far, and their Radeon GPUs, I mean, they didn't show up for half of the launches. I think there's quite a few Radeon GPUs that they don't even make at all. I think they've basically bailed on RDNA 3. So, weird situation. You can point to poor sales, but at the end of the day, it's still worth making these cards. It wasn't that long ago where they could sell every Radeon GPU they wanted to sell, so it doesn't really make sense to have that source of inventory just dry up. Because, I mean, the next boom could be just around the corner for all I know, and then, MSI is missing out on that huge amount of that huge supply of GPUs they could be selling. So, but as I said, I am clueless about all this stuff. I've heard a few little things, but I don't know what's going on there. But it's definitely a thing. You're not crazy.
No, that's an interesting explanation. That the more I think about it, could be definitely part of it. Well, let me ask you this question. Compressed AI Blocks writes, and it says, we've had many years of E-cores to see how they help. Well, they help with certain productivity workloads. They don't really help, even sometimes negatively affect gaming. Do either of you wish or think that we'll see a product from Intel that cuts back on the E-cores finally to say maybe just 4, and then uses the rest of the space for more than 8 P cores? Or will we see the stacking of more E cores and P cores going forward? The only thing I can add is that I've heard after Nova Lake there's a desire to start moving towards merging the architectures again away from E cores. It's a long time from now, though. So, but I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm not a big E core fan. They've sort of been a necessary evil for Intel, though. Like, if they didn't have the E core design, they would be very lost. Like, it's kind of worked out really well for them, because for a lot of the benchmarks, stuff like Cinebench, they work really well. They're like really great Cinebench accelerators, so they score big. And basically every reviewer leads with like Cinebench benchmarks, and they're good for that. And so they do have their place. But yeah, gaming, not necessarily one of them. We have seen examples where they can be useful when, yeah, what was where they scheduled them to handle a background task?
APO? Was it APO? My brain's saying APO.
Yeah, you're right. It was APO. God, that thing became so irrelevant so quickly. But there were some good examples where they were able to make that work. But yeah, Intel were the opposite of AMD on that. In that example, they were very quick to water those achievements down. They were like, no, don't read into this too much, guys. Like, most games this doesn't work that well for, but there's some examples where it works well. I was pretty taken back by that. I thought they'd be like, yeah, this is a thing we're going to add to all games, because the gains were huge. But
my theory is that because Arrow Lake removes hyperthreading, that they need to make that work, because for sure there will be games that use more than 8 threads. That's my theory. And then maybe while they were developing that, they were like, it works on Raptor Lake already. If we put it in a couple games, why not do that? I don't know for sure, but I have to imagine there has to be something going on, because Arrow Lake has less threads, doesn't have hyperthreading.
Yeah, I mean, the gaming thing's really complicated as well, because, there are plenty of games that can leverage more than 8 threads, but that doesn't mean that having more cores makes the game faster, right? Of course, as you're well aware. So if they manage to make the cores much more powerful, then you don't need that many of them. So like, if Zen 5, for example, if it was 20% faster for gaming, or 30%, like what we saw from Zen 3 to Zen 4, for example, 6 core, like the 9600X would be a weapon. Like that would be, it would be fast, as fast or faster than a 7800X 3D in a lot of games, which is wild to think, because those 6 cores would be so efficient, so powerful for gaming. Yeah.
This piece of content is brought to you by Silver Knight PCs. They are a veteran-owned American company based in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They offer everything from enterprise and business services to individual PC parts, including collector's items that are hard to get, to pre-built PCs, to excellent repair services. And of course, I can attest to that last one personally. One evening this summer, out of nowhere, my PC, the one I usually use for making all of this content, just shut off and would not turn on. I did the usual troubleshooting of checking, the GPU, RAM, motherboard, and eventually, though, around 4 a.m., I had to make a judgment call. Was I really about to strip down the PC from top to bottom, check every part in another PC, and then try to reinstall Windows, which would undoubtedly mean I don't get any sleep and might delay the broken silicon from coming out? Or was I just going to get my, Hotpoint tablet and call for help? Well, I chose the latter, and I'm glad I did, especially because I called Silver Knight PCs. They got me a shipping label within, hours in the middle of the night, or really morning at that point, and they got to work as quickly as possible. And I've gotten it back by now. I'm using it right now to make this ad, and really you should check out the other custom PCs they make as well. They're very easy to get them to make one for you too, because they have an excellent build tool that takes the guesswork out of everything. You tell them what types of games you even play, in addition to the performance and the budget you have or what you're looking for, and they customize and act as expert consultants for you to make the perfect PC just for you. And they give good advice, by the way. I've talked to them. They play PC games. They are enthusiasts. They're not going to do something silly like an OEM would do and put an RTX 3050 6GB with a non-K i9 just so they can claim there's i9 and RTX graphics included. No, they are actual enthusiasts that will give you an actual enthusiast PC like me or any expert would really advise. And at the end of the day,
this company supported me. And so I would be honored if all of you watching this, if you want some of these types of products, if you supported them in return, which also helps me get even better support and deals from them in the future if you do. So one more time, support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting Silver Knight PCs today.
So let me see here. Let me pivot to graphics because we got to talk about that at least a bit. Well, yeah, it's starting with bad news. I mean, so I recently leaked, and it's been rumored on and off basically this whole year, to be honest, that RDNA 4 is unlikely to launch before 2025. I'm told that a big reason is Navi 31. The second you drop a $500 or $600 Navi 31 competitor, what are we going to do with the XTX stock we have sitting here that is at a loss, probably below 700, maybe even 800. So what do you think about that, though? The fact that their AMD might not have RDNA 4 show up until next year.
Well, that was my expectation based on what I was told in private dinners, let's say, at Computex. So I spoke with a few people. They said they've tested it. They told me exactly how it's currently performing, and yeah, they were telling me CES announcement. So that's what I heard.
That's what I heard until a month ago.
Right.
And then someone insisted. They got this briefing from product management, and then they walked it back. So
it's always possible. I mean, they could move if.
They tested it like you said. I think they could launch it if they wanted to, but
possibly, yeah. I don't know where they are in that whole process of being able to release it into the wild. But yeah, it's possible that could get moved around depending on when they think the best time to strike is. But yeah, I was told CES, so that was my expectation, just because I heard it firsthand from someone who would absolutely know. But yeah, as you say, down the track it could get pulled forward or get pushed back or anything like that could happen. But yeah, they were pretty down on it. They were pretty, I shouldn't say upset, but more towards being upset. Like they weren't, like they're quite passionate about this stuff and they want AMD to do well. They really wanted competition with Nvidia. They don't want to, this was obviously someone who deals with both Nvidia and AMD. And yeah, they were pretty disappointed with what they were seeing. So my expectations set on that are pretty low, but again, AMD hasn't set any expectations there. So I try to block all that stuff out and just be like, okay, well, that's interesting to know, which is why I don't talk about it on the channel or anything. It's like, that's interesting to know, but ultimately I'll wait till I have it in hand and I can test it for myself because, you can end up going all over the place with what the people. It seems pretty clear, right, that RDNA 4 just didn't pan out the way they wanted, a bit like RDNA 3, and therefore they're just abandoning pushing it to the limits, either because of diminishing returns or whatever, but it's going to be sort of a mid-tier product, which is disappointing, but yeah, hopefully they can turn it around. I know they've announced that they've changed strategies and all that, but let's be honest, the second they can take the crown, they'll go for it. But yeah, they're just not in a position. The current sort of chiplet approach unfortunately hasn't really worked out as
so
well
you think
as
the
hoped.
chiplet thing they were working on didn't pan out?
Look, I don't know. I've heard a few different things, but it seems like that's a key feature of this approach, this architecture, and
for the high end,
Again, I'm almost making things up as I speak here, but it seems based on the information I've heard that it didn't scale as well, and that makes sense, right? Like if RDNA 4 could be realistically scaled up to challenge Nvidia at the high end, they're not going to be like, nah, we just don't want to do that. It just doesn't make sense. They're only changing strategy because they have to. Like they're for the key to success in the GPU business is basically top tier performance and features, which they've not really been able to achieve either of those things to the degree they need to anyway. But yeah, if they could scale RDNA 4 up to really give Nvidia a hard time, they would do so, right? Or at least you would hope they would do so. I don't know. It's really hard to get into the mindset of the Radeon division and what they're doing, because Tim and I both felt like with RDNA 2, they really could have taken it to Nvidia and clawed back some market share. And I know there's allocation and all that sort of stuff that has to be factored in, and
Yeah, they were competing with Zen.
Yeah.
They were competing with Zen 3. They were competing with Rembrandt or something. They're competing with the PS5 and the Xbox.
It's a tough one. It is a tough one.
It's like the worst time for them to win. Like,
yeah.
Why couldn't it have been a year or two later where they're not competing with a new console launch?
Yeah. I feel like there was an opportunity though there to make some ways into the GPU market, and it's a pretty lucrative market. So I would have taken that opportunity. But anyway, that's why I don't get paid the big bucks, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I've actually heard, God, this was years ago. I did like more than two videos about what's going on with high-end RDNA 4. And a reason it was more than just a few is there were people saying different things. Like there's some people, like, it seems like, especially the more you go downstream of AMD, it seemed like people thought, oh, well, our top RDNA 4 was having issues, with like, I think the picture of like the 13 chiplets or whatever, maybe more than 13, it was ridiculous. Like it looked like an MI300 monster, and, it was just not worth the time or the trouble. But then I heard someone else at AMD say, who reached out to me once I was talking like that, like, no, it would have worked. It just would have cost a lot of money. And we don't know if we have the bandwidth to support that and also launch Strix Halo, Strix, all these other things that this AI, all this AI junk that people will pay gobs of money for. And that it was kind of a calculation. The answer is probably a bit of both, I would imagine. And I think the RDNA 4 architecture, it's interesting you say diminishing returns, because it at least seems like it's panning out in the PS5 Pro, and at least from what I've heard, they're very excited about it. But PS5 Pro is stopping at the mid-range. So
yeah, that's right.
If that one does well, whatever, we're not talking about that even.
Yeah, it's like, for example, for gaming, when you start whacking on more CCDs, like you get to the point of diminishing returns, like you can add more cores, but the latency penalty and all the other factors, it's not worth it. So I'm not sure, but I mean, realistically, if you can challenge an RTX, like what do you think the RTX 5090 is going to cost? Do you reckon it'll be $1,600 US?
If you put a gun up to my head, I'd say $24.99. $24.99.
Yeah,
I don't know for sure, but I could see $299, $2,999, as much as I could see $1,999.
Yeah, I mean, if it launched for $2,000, let's say on the dot, I'd be like, yeah, okay, not shocked. Like, okay. So if we're expecting these sort of price tags, and we're not wishing for them, mind you, it's just the reality of the situation, there's got to be some margins in there for AMD to compete at the high end. Like, there's plenty of room under, if $2,000 is right, plenty of price points under that to release what could be, what would be, if they were going to do it, a competitive product, right? But if they're not doing it, my only real conclusion there is that it wouldn't be a competitive product.
Maybe not for the price, though. I mean, the thing I saw of 20 CCD or 20 different chiplets, maybe it would have won. But what if it would have cost $3,000? And my suspicion I have is that they probably worry. And I actually heard from people at Nvidia a while ago that they were like, if AMD beats us by 20%, we're just going to market DLSS harder, and pretend that we're ahead of them. I wonder if AMD's worried, unless FSR 4 or 5 is as good or close enough to the newest DLSS, that enthusiasts are probably going to ignore AMD, even just for the Nvidia sticker, unless they can trounce them in all ways. And it takes a lot of money to support these products. There's a part of me that goes, yeah, but if they just launch 2 dies, they're monolithic, they don't have to worry about the complexity, maybe they'll actually work perfectly at launch, and they can use that money for other things. Especially, GPU sales are down right now too. I wonder if that's another part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of factors at play, and there's a lot of what ifs and speculation in this conversation. But I mean, if a 7900 XTX, for example, was 20% faster for rasterization performance than an RTX 4090, and ray tracing and upscaling remains the way it is today, I can't see that product not competing well. That would force Nvidia into having to do something. That would be a pretty spectacular product. Yeah, it would be. So I don't know, but yeah, it's tough with the Radeon thing. I mean, like, you know, RDNA 3 again, like how well would a 1700 XT have sold if it had have launched at, let's say, 750? Like that was the MSRP. So you're putting that
technically
down.
sold out for a while, but now they can't get rid of them. So
yeah, but if the MSRP was that, like you were guaranteed 750 being, you know, the starting point for at least MSRP base model cards. Because what did the 4070 start at? That was $700, wasn't it? That launched, was that 600? Did it launch at 600 or 700?
It launched at 600, yeah, but the 4070 Ti launched at 800, which was this 4070. I don't think came out for a long time until after the 4070 Ti. Well, not a long time, but 4070 Ti came out first at 800.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, the 4070 Ti is what I'm thinking about. So I don't know. They basically needed to be more competitive on pricing, which they kind of did quietly for a while after the reviews went live, and so. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, to have that product land with a bang and be recommended by basically everyone, it would have to launch at $700. So if they had have released a 1700 XT at $700 and everything else fell in line with what makes sense with that, then RDNA 3 should have sold well. I mean, at the very least, I would have been recommending it over pretty much all of the GeForce competition. I imagine others like Gamers Nexus would have had, you know, many positive things to say about it. I mean, it launched at $900, right? Like,
well, yeah, that was just idiotic. It should have been 800 at most.
Yeah, I think at $700, it would have been extremely well.
Yeah, and you're talking about the XT too, not the XTX. Okay.
Yeah, just the XT. So, yeah, the 1700 XT. Yeah, MSRP was $900. It quickly dropped as low as I think $700.
I think it's around 650 or something now.
Really? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, so they're selling it for that now. It really, if that's the case, I haven't looked at GPU prices for ages, to be honest. I haven't been super interested, but yeah, if that had launched at $700 US, would have been a banging product. I mean, it's got what? It's got. Is it 20 gigs of VRAM?
20 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
So, I thought that too. Even just 800. I mean, you're pricing it the same as a 12 gigabyte 4070 Ti. Right. That would have been some marketing.
But I mean, that's at least a real win for AMD. Like you can say, like, yeah, okay, ray tracing's not as great. Like, you know, for the people that really have to have ray tracing turned on. Again, I'm not a huge advocate for ray tracing. Like, there are some examples where it looks good. A lot of examples, it's quite noisy. The performance, it's massive. And
especially earlier games.
Yeah, I mean, even like Black Myth Wukong, for example, I played that on a 4090. I prefer not to have to enable frame generation, maybe a bit of DLSS upscaling, quality mode at 4K without ray tracing enabled, and that's how I'd play that game. But that's a personal preference thing, you know, like it's not whether AMD led with the ray tracing thing or Nvidia. It's just I don't like the massive performance hit for what is often very minor improvement in terms of visuals. It's a good screenshot mode. You can certainly go and look at certain things in games and be like, oh, wow, yeah, there's clearly a difference there. That does look better. But for me, playing the game, and again, this comes down to the type of gamer you are, what you focus on, you know, what makes the gaming experience immersive and fun for you, but slightly better, you know, reflection quality and stuff like that, shadows and whatnot doesn't. For me, I prefer the high frame rates. I prefer to leverage my, you know, high-speed OLED panel, for example, rather than, you know, have some slightly fancier looking graphics in some instances. But anyway, my point is a very fast, good value rasterization card would probably get the tick of approval from me.
So I think hopefully, I don't know really, but hopefully the good news is eventually that maybe this could happen again. Compressed AI Blocks writes and says, guys, UDNA seems like the completely logical next step for Radeon and what AMD wants in the GPU market. Do you think it'll be more successful, that is, merging architectures this time than GCN was, due to AMD being in a much more healthy position compared to 10 years ago, where they just literally couldn't afford to keep making high-end cards? Secondly, do you think NVIDIA is now so entrenched due to their software and feature lead in the space that AMD might make some inroads, but a majority of the market just isn't going to leave that ecosystem? I guess it's two questions. The first thing I'd say is, the thing that excites me, or something I was very outspoken about when I saw the UDNA thing, is all right, well, now they don't have an excuse. If they only have one architecture and the architecture can do gaming and compute, and they make a $5,000 AI card, now they have to, if it actually performs to a reasonable degree, launch at least some cut down version of that for gaming instead of having to decide, well, we have CDNA, should we bother to make the big RDNA? So that's something I'm excited about with UDNA, hopefully. But anyway, do you agree with that? And do you think AMD being in a more healthy position could help them this time?
You would think so. I can't imagine it would hurt them. So they've got a better chance of making it work. That much is true. But again, it comes down to the architectures, and we've said it with Zen 5. Like, if it's not focused on certain things that will help with gaming performance, then it depends on how universal the architecture is. And AI models and things like that are quite different to Unreal engines. There is some overlap, and that's what Nvidia's worked very hard on, making that overlap work with the Tensor cores doing stuff like DLSS and ray tracing and whatnot. But anything's possible. Absolutely anything's possible. I guess the fact that they're not just doing this, they're going back to something they've sort of tried before, but they can do it differently, I suppose. So it's not something radically new they've never done, but it's also not the same thing that's not really working. Like, they gave it a shot. It's not really working. So yeah, my fingers are crossed.
Yeah. I think we'll have to see, but I at least hope that this means that there just isn't an excuse anymore. But let's say it is good. Let's say there is some high-end card. I mean, do you think, I guess this is hard though, right? Because we're talking about like a hypothetical of a hypothetical at this point. Like, that doesn't make sense. I was going to ask you about, would people leave NVIDIA's ecosystem, but we don't know how good that will be in the future.
It's like the Arrow Lake thing.
Well, how entrenched do you think it is now? Let's say, oh, surprise, this was the biggest mastermind behind the scenes sleight of hand in history. There is high-end RDNA 4. It does beat the 5090. Let's say it's 2,000, like 2,500 NVIDIA. Let's say they're the same price. They're both $2,000.
Yeah. So
AMD's 20% faster. Would people switch, or do you think they'd stick with NVIDIA's ecosystem?
You're not going to see a universal shift. It's just Ryzen again, right? Like, if we go back to 2017 and I say to you, Tom, Ryzen's going to be like pretty good at productivity. There'll be 8-core processors for similar price to Intel's quad-core processors, which will be much better for productivity. The gaming performance will be a bit all over the place, but the prices will be good. Do you think AMD is going to, take over market share in the retail enthusiast scene from Intel? And you'd probably be like, can't see it. So
I actually said that they would back then. I was pretty confident. I'd call it a gut feeling, though.
I said it had potential. That was really as far as I was willing to go, because some of the gaming performance was pretty bad, and then it improved over time.
It's better than Bulldozer, though.
Yeah, it was.
But of course, everything is.
I guess the point I'm making is that, at least in my opinion, and I think I certainly had the opinion of the vast majority of people who were sitting back and watching this play out, was that Ryzen was a long shot. Like, it was going to be so hard for AMD to turn it around and start beating Intel in sales. And you can say, Intel had their fab issues, which they've still got ongoing fab issues. And with the Nvidia thing, it's different because Nvidia is so diverse, and they're very heavily invested in the software side of things. They use TSMC just as AMD does, so there's no real advantage there. It just comes down to the architectures, and Nvidia has a very good architecture. So, but as you say, if they end up making something that's 20% faster, it's like, let's say it's objectively better, then they will win. Anyone who has
the DLSS advantage, people would say, whatever, FSR 3.1's fine.
I mean, the assumption there is that keeps developing as well, to the point where, sure. I think that is going to happen. But what if it happened
right now? Like right now?
Well, it would be the Ryzen moment, right? It would be the catalyst for the turning point. Like, it would get. There's certainly people who would buy Radeon if it's objectively better. Okay, and there'll be people who are like, because I remember talking to people back when it was probably around Zen 2 came out, and you could buy a 2700X for like $140 or something, I think it was. It was next to nothing.
My brother got one for that, yeah.
Yeah, and you had to pay twice as much or something for the Intel equivalent. I had people who were like, there's no way I'm buying AMD CPUs. They're so bad. And they was, spending way, or they were buying an equivalent Intel processor that was nowhere near as good as in terms of pricing. And then that was a thing. And as time went by, there were fewer and fewer people who weren't willing to give Ryzen a shot. And, the deal was sealed with like a 5800X3D.
Yes.
You had to be very heavily in denial to not, realize that they were exceptional CPUs in terms of performance and power efficiency.
But if I use this RAM with Rocket Lake, technically in this game, yeah. But you had to be talking like that.
I can't even give Intel guys a hard time for that, because boy, oh boy, did we see a lot of that with Zen 5. Like, Zen 5 was the biggest advertisement for Linux gaming I've ever come across. Holy moly. Like, it was like, but anyway, that's just, that's the extremes. But yeah, no, I think that would be, you've got to start somewhere. It's the same thing what we're talking about with Arrow Lake, right? Like Arrow Lake has to be good. It has to be. There's no other option. It has to be good. They have to take a hit on the margins. They have to. Like it has to be competitively priced. They have to win people over to the Intel platform. They have to get people basically accepting Intel again. They have to do that. And then the next step can occur where hopefully they can continue on and rebuild the brand, and away they go. And that's what Radeon needs to do, but hasn't been able to do. So, yeah, look, they'd win some people over, and then if the next generation, again, is very, very competitive, then, they'll win more people over. And at some point, it would be a competitive market. But, yeah.
I like how you almost can't say that without laughing, like, because you're just like thinking of your former self. Like, we used to say that so much more 5 years ago, and now we're like, oh, we were so optimistic back then. Yeah,
well, I mean, you sort of got to be, and like I say, it's not me wanting AMD to do well or whatever. It's like the industry would be so much better if there was a duopoly instead of a monopoly. But yeah, And the same thing with Intel, right? Like, it'd be awesome if Intel could get there, but that's an even bigger pipe dream, it seems. But anyway, we'll wait and see how that all pans out. But you don't want one dominant force, and you definitely don't want that dominant force being Nvidia. But that's not to say that I think AMD or anyone else would be any better in that position. I mean, they're a for-profit company. They're
certainly not angels, no.
No, and we've seen it with AMD. Like a lot of people like to think that AMD is an angel, let's say, but we've seen as they've become more dominant on the CPU side of things, we've seen things like Ryzen 7 5700s, and a lot of people like to sweep that under the rug and say it's not a big deal, but it's definitely anti-consumer and it's definitely unnecessary. But they did it. Because they feel like they're in a position where they can get away with doing that. There's no way, absolutely no way in hell you would have seen that with Zen or Zen Plus. Like,
no,
there's no examples anything like that, is there? They didn't try and release a cut down, like the 2700 was always going to be a slightly underclocked 2700X. It was never going to have half the L3 cache. I mean, and if it did, I'd swallow then. If it did, they would have started that from the start.
Yeah, the only one I can come up with is like that weird thing they always did in Polaris with like the Polaris era, like the RX 560, and then that it did have more stream processors. And then there was the RX 560 896 edition. It's like, what? This is a 460. Like, what are we like? But it's a low end product. That's the best I can come up with.
They've done that for other markets and stuff like that. But that was more out of survival, I think.
And during the mining boom, when they were just trying to sell anything they could.
Yeah, that's true.
So I have to ask, this is probably like the last thing to really talk about here, but are you excited for the 5090 and 5080? We talked about RDNA 4. I mean, we kind of talked about the 5090 a little bit already, but like, what are your expectations, and is there any excitement there?
Oh, yeah, there's excitement. I love NVIDIA GPUs. So they're always awesome, right? Like, There's certainly frustrations. Like, people know I'm not fond of the 4060 Ti. The NVIDIA, it's a love-hate thing with the NVIDIA products because I love the RTX 4090. It's
me too.
Awesome product, but it's really expensive. But, what do you do about that? Can I blame NVIDIA for making money? Like, they can sell it for that price. They've sold well at that price. That's the reality of the situation. That's that. So I guess I'm okay with the high-end dumb products. Like even the 3090 Ti, 6950 XT, I've always been okay with those dumb products, and they were dumb products. You just buy the product under them and you get, it was 10% of the performance for half the price or something. So I'm okay with that. What I hate and is disappointing is what we talked about earlier, where the entry level just gets, worse. Like the 4060 Ti with 8 gigabytes of VRAM at $400 US. It's so bad. And I'm not criticizing that. Like that product has no bearing on me. Like I use a 4090. Whether I was a hardware reviewer or not, I would get a relatively high-end GPU. I wouldn't be buying an entry-level GPU. I would have at one point in my life when I was much younger and starting out, sure. And some people just don't want to invest that much money in their hobby, but I love PC gaming. It's one of the things I enjoy doing most in life, so I can justify spending a lot of money on it. So that's me sorted, right? In terms of personal, don't care. But I know there are a lot of younger guys and guys in different financial positions, and it's painful to see them faced with a 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte graphics card for $400 US. Like it's close to $1,000 Australian dollars. It's wild. And it's just a crap product, like for that money. It's really bad. Even like the 4070, I was okay with that at $600 US, 12 gigs of VRAM. I was like, okay, that's all right, I guess. Like we'll take it compared to, at that point it was $1,200 or something for a 4080. So it's like, all right, well, I'll take that. And then, then we got the 4060 and stuff like that. And yeah, so it's really, and AMD did us no favors either there that, the 7600 XT should have been $300 max, I reckon.
Well, I mean, they're comparing it to a 8 gigabyte NVIDIA card. 8 gigabyte NVIDIA card that's more efficient and has DLSS, to be fair. But yeah. So anyway, basically it's just the low-end stuff kind of sucking. So yeah, I think the 5090 is going to be awesome. I'm excited for it. It's going to be a cool product, I would have to imagine. Hopefully the 5080 is also good and represents slightly better value. And then, you're laughing. It's going to be it's going to be a 4090 16 gigabyte for $1,200. That's probably what it's going to be, the 5080.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. And then I shudder to think 5070, 5060.
I think the most we can hope for is that the 5070 has 16 gigabytes and that the 5060 just doesn't come out until they have the 12 gigabyte modules ready, the 3 gigabyte modules to get to 12 gigabytes. But even then, that's probably going to be $400 for a 12 gigabyte card, for being honest.
Yeah. So
you're excited to see new levels of performance, but below that, because there's a question that I'm kind of skipping a little bit, that this person's like, they think that Blackwell is going to be like Pascal. And I'm like, no, I think Lovelace was Pascal and they just didn't give you a discount. And I think Blackwell is going to be probably a lot like Turing.
Yeah, that's probably right. We'll have to wait and see, but
sure.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, we should have got the price to performance uplift this generation, but and there's the whole thing with the VRAM and stuff as well. Again, which affects sort of the lower end cards, but even 12 gigabytes on like a 4070 Ti for $700 US, that's pretty bad.
Or 800. Or they wanted to make it 900 too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it wasn't even that. Yeah. So anyway, I'm always excited for the next generation GPUs because they are generally exciting. Even the 2080 Ti was probably like the 2080 Ti. They were probably the least exciting GPUs, and they were still pretty good. Obviously, the 1080 Ti was very good. Then we got the 3080, 3090 Ti. They were all very good, but cryptocurrency mining boom kind of ruined that launch. And then, 4080, 4090, breathtakingly fast. Just, you have to be quite well off to get them, or willing to sacrifice a lot of your disposable income on the one thing. Either way, it's pretty brutal. But yeah, as I said, that's the reality of the situation.
All right, so I think I got one more question for you before I let you go. Melodic Warrior writes in, he says, "G'day, Steve. I have 2 questions.
That's
Recently, thank you. I've noticed an alarming trend of communication issues between marketing and product management when dealing with these companies, Intel, AMD, and Nvidia. Have you seen it as well?" I think we kind of already talked about it a little. "And has it made it difficult to be able to review products?" Maybe already answered this.
Yeah, yes and no. Well, I would say Nvidia has been pretty good. They have, as of about a year ago, changed the way they do it. So instead of having big tech media events or big tech briefings, they generally split off into smaller teams and will tackle individual regions at times that make sense for that region. And it's more of a it's very good the way that they're handling it. So yeah, full credit to Nvidia there and their PR teams, and they're even getting people who, I guess, sort of like the more engineering focused, the sort of more technical marketing guys involved as well, which is cool. We usually get one of them on hand for questions, and it's direct briefing. So like they'll do like a hardware unbox briefing. So they'll basically present all the information to us. And during the briefing, they'll stop at points and say, have you guys got any questions or anything, you want to talk about here, or any further information you'd like? And then they progress and you get to the end, and it's sort of like, it's kind of like the Q&A question. It's very Q&A session at the end. It's very direct and it works well. So Nvidia are good there. Obviously, you still get like the Nvidia marketing. You get the frame generation slides and all that sort of stuff. But whatever.
2 to 4x times more performance.
You get that garbage. But with us, there, it's much easier to get information. Whereas AMD is still doing like the recorded briefings and stuff like that, which aren't as good. But again, if they're giving you good information, that's fine. And generally, I like to get the product in hand anyway. I like to ignore all that noise, and a clear and concise review guide is handy. But I like to get my hands on it, start testing it, test it the way, because with the tech briefings and stuff, there's a lot of stuff that's not relevant to us. Like it might be for the guys that do like server testing and stuff like that, or different. We're very focused in what we do, so a lot of it doesn't apply to us. So sort of tailoring that presentation to our reviews, and like AMD knows what our reviews are, right? They know what we benchmark, how we test. So that would be a good way of going about it. But yeah, it's more. Obviously, I've laid out the issues that we've had with AMD as of recent. Then Intel, the Intel Arc team has been very good. Intel Arc's been great. There just hasn't been too much to do there just yet. So yeah, I've been impressed with the Intel Arc guys. The CPU side of things is a bit sort of crickets. You get a CPU turn up in the mail.
It's so interesting because you'd think it'd be the same, but it's not.
No, different guys, different teams, different ways of going about things. So yeah, we'll see if things change there for this release. But yeah.
So you'd say Intel, or not Intel, AMD is still by far the one that needs to work on communication the most. It's
probably,
or is it a mixed bag?
You see, the thing, AMD is quite good with talking with us, and I shouldn't, ripping on AMD with that sort of stuff's tough, because our local team is very good. They look after us very well, and I feel very bad for them because they have to deal with us. So they cop tons of flack because, we don't pull our punches. We don't sugarcoat stuff. If we think a product's bad, we just say it. And they'll cop, the fallout of that, let's say. So essentially, we often go through the local team, who then passes stuff on to the US-based team or whoever's doing the testing, which is it's usually in the US. So they're very good with us. They're very good at sampling us. They're very good at giving us all the information they can. But once they have to go outside of that, then it can get messy. And there's obviously time zones and stuff. So yeah, it's tough. Like if we're asking for stuff at 6 o'clock at night or whatever. It's pretty late for you now. So
Right.
there's those issues. But yeah, the main problem with AMD as of late has been, the communication stuff with, well, first of all, setting the wrong expectations, right? Getting their initial marketing, I guess you could say, wrong. Tim dedicated a whole video to that, which I'm sure AMD loved. But yeah, it's just getting the initial stuff, expectations set right, I think, is the big issue. They do a good job of getting us samples with plenty of time to test and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, the review guides could be improved. We've given them that feedback. They say it's been taken on board and they'll use that for improving moving forward. But yeah, there's just the all the stuff that set Zen 5 up to fail worse than it probably needed to.
Yeah, I think with AMD, it's the communication between teams. I mean, what I gather with NVIDIA people is they talk really well to each other. Everyone's on the same page. Like, they really know what each other are doing, to the dismay sometimes of management, actually, because if I hear about the Switch. But, like, they really do. They're on the same page. And with AMD, I really even, like, with the Zen 5 launch, have a suspicion, a theory that I'm like, I'm not sure this is true, but, like, just throwing it out there. Like, what if the people who benchmarked for those marketing slides had, the administrator mode turned on, and they did that? They didn't even tell, like, that wouldn't really be the marketing people. It would be like maybe the early testing people, those going to those slides, and the people in charge of launching Zen 5 run their own benchmarks, get 5% and go, yeah, I don't know. They didn't talk to these people about why that's the feeling I get with AMD is these people just do not talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment on that. I have no idea. It certainly seems very disconnected. The administrative things, the whole thing was frustrating though, again, because like I said, if you test, because they were pointing to that being the problem, the administrator mode, but surely they test all the CPUs the same way, right? So,
what if they don't? What if one group did it one way and one group did it the other?
Well, I don't think that's plausible because they use automated testing software, which requires the admin mode. So, I mean, that would, in a roundabout way, that would actually make sense. But no, I don't think that was the case. And at the end of the day, their testing was largely right. I mean, and this is the frustrating thing about this entire Zen 5 drama is that AMD themselves, once they finally did all the testing after the reviews went live, found on average with a very interesting selection of games, a 5% uplift. And it was, a lot of their testing was stuff like Rocket League, where, 5% was a fairly substantial amount of frames because you were going from 800
300 frames. Yeah.
No, it was like 800. It was, they just League of Legends. So, I think for the 9700X versus 7700X comparison, they tested about 23 to 26 games. And of those 20-ish plus games, 2 of them had been released in the last, I think it was 3 years, 2 or 3 years.
Not even like 1 or 2, 3.
So it's a completely different sample of games. But in the games that did overlap, like your Cyberpunk, which is quite an old game now. I know it's had the 2.0 update and Phantom Liberty and all that. But in the games that could overlap, we got similar margins to them. It was really those games like your League of Legends, Rocket League and that sort of blew it out a bit. But when we're finding 3% and they're finding 5%, I can't stress this enough. That's the same thing. 2%, it's minuscule differences. So if you're talking about a completely different sample of games and your data's within 2%, you call that good. Like, that's just that. So, I don't even know how we got into this rant again about Zen 5, but basically I was saying that it's frustrating because AMD themselves reported Zen 5%. Like, that's what it is for gaming, guys. That's really best case what it is for gaming. I know a few media outlets like, I think you might have even talked about this last time we spoke, like Tom's Hardware pointed to bigger margins. But
there's reasons for that with RAM and stuff.
Which is fine. Like, I'm not calling them out or saying their testing is wrong. It's perfectly valid. But when you're comparing Tom's margins to our margins, you have to realize that we're using apples to apples memory for Zen 4 and Zen 5. It's DDR5 6000 CL30, whereas Tom's was using, I think, 5200 for Zen 4 and 5600 for Zen 5. They were saying that makes...
And now AMD says you should use 8000, Steve.
Well, they
the
actually...
story continues.
Yeah, they do. So there's... I guess I just want to make clear that I'm not saying one test method's more right or more wrong than the other. We do 6000 because that's what we recommend. It's what AMD actually recommends. But Tom's method there is valid. It just does lead to bigger margins between Zen 4 and Zen 5. There is a technical reason for why they saw a bigger performance uplift. So that explains that quite well, really. Anyway, I'll stop ranting about Zen 5. I lied to you at the start, evidently, because I said I don't even want to talk about it.
I was about to bring that up.
Yeah,
it's like you can't, but it's hard not to. It's kind of like after the RDNA 3 launch, except this is much more insane, honestly. It's hard to not stop talking. It's hard to stop talking about it with how bizarre this has been.
Definitely.
But on that note, I think I'll let you go. At some point here, I got to eat my dinner. And, I want to thank you for coming on, though. It's always great to have you on. I'll be excited the next time you do as well. And please tell people where they can find you. We've already said it, but again, remind people.
Harbor Unboxed. Just type that in the search and you'll find us, and then you'll hear Tim or me talking about something. I don't know. We'll be probably talking about Zen 5, let's be honest.
Yeah, talking about Zen 5 or probably talking about Zen 5. All right, well, I'll also plug, please make sure you like, share, subscribe, ring the bell button, comment below, subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app of choice, give us a review, let it run on loop on 10 phones in your basement, and consider joining us on Patreon as well. But no matter what, though, you guys have somehow made it this far into it. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and have a good rest of the week, everybody.
See ya.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Carrie No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey,
If you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Fool, Zjits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Deke, Jan Rauner, Nicholas Buckner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jem Ferreira, Valkamalev, Jensen Wang, Gregory Acker, Sarcastro, Toka, Chris Trick, Compressed AI Blocks, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jonathan, Franco Frederic, Jake223, Jake Martin, Chrysantine, Slicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Neith Rezink, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy Ishid, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Jamie Witters, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Mai Sharona, Jeff Sedler, Windstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, JSMH, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Winwang, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, McDaffy, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Hodgson Haggerty, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushbot, Himsa Gunn, Tails2299, Mealval, Virga, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Brian Wright, Gian Violi, AC, Alex Vega, Dr. J. Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Christopher Cho, Elbert Gunn, Kikum, Solarized 80, Thalo 215, Jeffrey Gentleman, Matthew Marlows, Lord Starscream, Brian P, Hudat 42, Sprutnik, Figoff, Higuk, Cornstar 671, Pento Winter, Hal Richard, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John Wick Boomstick, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nick Zizmania, Sakosha, Ivalez, Armand Vakatora, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.